President Biden is calling the assassination of Jovenel Moïse very worrisome. The Haitian president was killed overnight in his home. Officials say the 53-year-old was shot. His wife was also hurt in the attack. Moïse was in office for 4 years and had been the subject of protests for months. CBS News' Skyler Henry has more.
Haiti's President Jovenel Moïse was in his private residence when he was assassinated, and his wife shot and wounded around 1 a.m. this morning. Haiti's interim prime minister is calling it a hateful, inhumane, and barbaric act. A statement from Haiti's embassy in Washington says the attack was a well-coordinated attack by a highly trained and heavily armed group. The Caribbean correspondent for the Miami Herald says the assassin spoke Spanish and English with an American accent.
One high-ranking official told me that these are quote-unquote mercenaries. We're still trying to figure out who they were, who hired them, what's the motive behind all of this.
Moïse had been in office for 4 years and the target of protests for months. The opposition accused him of trying to increase his power and demanded he step down. Moïse had ruled by decree for more than 2 years after the country failed to hold elections.
So this is a president that has faced a lot of controversy in a country where you have a humanitarian crisis, you have an armed gang crisis, alarming spikes in kidnapping, you also have an economic crisis. I mean, it has just been an overall country that's volatile.
The Haitian embassy here in Washington called on the international community to launch an investigation. The Biden administration says the assassination is horrific and they're still assessing the situation.
You need a lot more information, but it's very worrisome about the state of Haiti.
In a phone call to a television show, Haiti's interim prime minister guaranteed political continuity. He said Haiti's national police and other authorities have the situation under control, despite some reports of ransacking in Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince. Skyler Henry, CBS News, Washington.
To talk more about this, I'd like to bring in managing editor for the Haitian Times, Macollvie Neel. Hi, Macollvie, welcome. What are you hearing about the investigation into this assassination and who is believed to be behind it?
Hi, Tanya. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure. First and foremost, I should say that this is really a moment that's really shaken a lot of Haitians and Haitian Americans across the New York region where we're based, where the Haitian Times is based. And everyone really is asking the same questions that you're asking and trying to just wrap their minds around, who could have done this and why. Having said that, there's a lot of reasons that we can speculate around why. As you saw in the previous segment, there's speculation around different groups coming from Latin America who may or may not have been, contracted to carry out this assassination. We don't know right now. We're still trying to just make sure we confirm information before we put it out there. But we do know from different video that we saw that circulated on WhatsApp and different media, there is footage of a group of people, gunmen, who do appear to be heavily armed, who were dressed in military garb. And we did hear and see gunshots being fired on that video. The identities are still, unknown to us at this time. And so we're just watching and being respectful as the authorities carry out their investigations and everyone tries to just make sense of what's happening and the next steps for the country. One of the main being the question of succession, like who's next now to lead the country.
Absolutely. Can you give us a better understanding of what has been happening in Haiti politically that may have led up to this attack?
Right. So Jovenel Moïse, I'll start there, came into power back in 2017, and he got into the National Palace under a cloud of controversy. To begin with, there were people who were saying he shouldn't have ever been president or been in that role. And so that brought up questions around the Haitian constitution itself. And so from the very beginning, his administration and Jovenel himself as a personality has been beleaguered in many different ways. It didn't help matters that soon after he took power, there was a scandal around Petrocaribe, which led to a fuel crisis, fuel shortage in the country. That followed just the economic, the typical economic need that people face every day in terms of no jobs. And so we saw a rise in just insecurity. Soon after that, gangs started to proliferate and just kind of mushroomed across Haiti, certainly Port-au-Prince to be exact. And so for the past year or so, we've seen a lot of kidnappings for ransom. We've seen a lot of that then devolve into just incredible gun violence where anyone could be a victim, right? People just acting out of impunity who are affiliated with different gangs. And so we heard information about the gangs being affiliated with the government itself in terms of Jovenel and his wife, First Lady Martine Moïse. We heard information about gangs working for the opposition, and it was just never clear. What hasn't helped matters, is, COVID-19 and the pandemic. Although Haiti did fairly well compared to other countries at the beginning of the pandemic, lately it had been seeing a surge in cases, partly due to just the variants, and Haiti being the only country in the Caribbean that does not have a COVID vaccine right now. There's just been delays due primarily to the lack of infrastructure in the country. And so when you have all of these things and no one really leading, we also saw things, this is the kind of thing that could happen, right? We also saw just 4 months ago, February 7th, the anniversary of Jovenel's ascension to power. There was an attempt that he claims was made on his life in an attempted coup, because many in the opposition felt he was not supposed to be in power past 4 years. He claims it needed to be the 5 years that's in one of Haiti's constitutions. And so that controversy led to what President Moïse called an attempted coup d'etat back in February of this year. So that was exactly 4 months ago. With all of these swirling around him, I believe he did have some foreshadowing of this killing coming. He has mentioned it before, that he was under a lot of stress, that people had threatened him and his family before. And so back in February, he did mention that there were attempts on his life. And sadly, I guess those attempts were successful today.
Mm. And you mentioned that, of course, one of the biggest questions a lot of Haitians have right now is where will the leadership go from here, correct? And the interim prime minister is expected to step in and lead the nation. But we also know a new prime minister who had yet to be sworn in had also already been appointed. There's nothing in Haiti's constitution dictating who could replace the president. So what do you believe this means for the country moving forward? Is Haiti going to be holding new elections soon, or does this mean a new political crisis?
Tanya, I think we'll all just wait and see and hope for the best. That's what a lot of people that we've spoken with this morning have said and have shared. As a Haitian American myself, I too, I'm in that camp of, hoping for the best, right? And just praying that this doesn't turn into an even worse crisis. We know that today a lot of people woke up to this news in Haiti and just couldn't fathom it, because this is not a common occurrence in Haiti, despite all of the crises that we've covered and talked about over the years. Coups d'etats and coups are the regular MO, right? But an actual assassination, this is only the third one we've seen in our 200-year history. And so from 1806, there was one soon after the birth of our nation. 1915, there was another. And so it's been more than 100 years since we've seen an assassination, even though that's, common in other places. So people woke up really shaken and just wondering what's going on and where do they stand. Like we've seen from our correspondents, different photos and videos of the streets being completely bare and empty. There's no market, which is a big deal in Haiti, because market is a sign of daily life being, being normal, right? And we haven't seen that today. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the succession piece, we do have Prime Minister Claude Joseph, who is temporarily in control. And he has been acting as the head of state for now with the statements that he's put out. And so he himself had been interim, and his term had just been extended, I believe, last week before the naming of the permanent prime minister, Ariel Henry. Mm-hmm. And so now, with everyone waiting for the installation to happen, we just don't know who will actually, if that will actually be carried out. Part of the problem is that people are operating with different interpretations of the Constitution, the 1987 Constitution, and an amendment to it from 2012, I believe, that wasn't fully ratified. And so these are the questions that the political scientists, the advisors, and I suppose the international community will have to help the next administration, whether it's led by Claude Joseph or Ariel Henry, figure out. With the constitutional crisis, one thing we had been looking forward to covering is the referendum that had been postponed for a variety of reasons, this constitutional referendum that Moïse had really pushed for because of all these questions around, what governs what when. And so sadly, he won't live to see it if it does happen, but that is something that the Provisional Electoral Council does have scheduled for the fall, right before general elections take place. So we'll have to wait and see and just keep praying that it doesn't turn into a further crisis for Haitians.
Macollvie Neel, thank you so much. We do hope that the situation resolves itself quickly and peacefully. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tanya. Have a good day.